ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ. Welcome to another segment of Coach Gurbani's a-sabad-a-day. The recitation today is from Gaudi Mahalla Tija, and the recitation: Gaudi Mahalla Tija, Gur ki Seva kare Pira Jio, Har naam ਧਿਆਏ. ਮੰਝੋਂ ਦੂਰ ਨ ਜਾਹੇ ਪਿਰਾ ਜੀਓ, ਘਰ ਬੈਠਿਆਂ ਹਰ ਪਾਏ. ਘਰ ਬੈਠਿਆ ਹਰ ਪਾਏ, ਸਦਾ ਚਿਤ ਲਾਏ. ਸਹਿਜੇ ਸਤ ਸੁਭਾਏ. ਗੁਰ ਕੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਖਰੀ ਸੁਖਾਲੀ, ਜਿਸਨੋਂ ਆਪ ਕਰਾਏ. ਨਾਮੋ ਬੀਜੈ ਨਾਮੋ ਜੰਮੈ, ਨਾਮੋ ਮਨੇ ਵਸਾਏ. ਨਾਨਕ ਸਚ ਨਾਮ ਵਡਿਆਈ, ਪੂਰਬ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਪਾਏ. ਹਰ ਕੋ ਨਾਮ ਮੀਠਾ ਪਿਰਾ ਜਿਉ, ਜਾਂ ਚਾਖੇ ਚਿਤ ਲਾਏ. ਰਸਨਾ ਹਰ ਰਸ ਚਾਖ, ਬੁਏ ਜਿਉ ਅਨ ਰਸ ਸਾਧ ਗਵਾਏ. ਸਦਾ ਹਰ ਰਸ ਪਾਏ, ਜਾਂ ਹਰ ਪਾਏ. ਰਸਨਾ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਸੁਹਾਏ. ਨਾਮ ਧਿਆਏ ਸਦਾ ਸੁਖ ਪਾਏ, ਨਾਮੇ ਰਹੇ ਲਿਵਲਾਏ. ਨਾਮੇ ਉਪਜੈ ਨਾਮੇ ਬਿਨਸੈ, ਨਾਮੇ ਸਚ ਸਮਾਏ. ਨਾਨਕ ਨਾਮ ਗੁਰਮਤੀ ਪਾਈਐ, ਆਪੇ ਲਏ ਲਵਾਏ. ਇਹ ਵਡਿਆਣੀ ਇਹ ਵਡਾਣੀ ਚਾਕਰੀ ਪਿਰਾ ਜੀਓ, ਧਨ ਛੋੜ ਪਰਦੇਸ ਸਿਧਾਏ. ਦੂਜੈ ਕਿਨੈ ਸੁਖ ਨ ਪਾਇਓ ਪਿਰਾ ਜੀਓ, ਵਿਖਿਆ ਲੋਭ ਲੁਭਾਏ. ਵਿਖਿਆ ਲੋਭ ਲੁਭਾਏ, ਭਰਮ ਭੁਲਾਏ. ਉਹ ਕਿਉ ਕਰ ਸੁਖ ਪਾਏ. ਚਾਕਰੀ ਵਿਡਾਣੀ ਖਰੀ ਦੁਖਾਲੀ, ਆਪ ਵੇਚ ਧਰਮ ਗਵਾਏ. ਮਾਇਆ ਬੰਧਨ ਟਿਕੇ ਨਾਹੀ, ਖਿਨ ਖਿਨ ਦੁਖ ਸੰਤਾਏ. ਨਾਨਕ ਮਾਇਆ ਕਾ ਦੁਖ ਤਦੈ ਚੁਕੈ, ਜਾਂ ਗੁਰ ਸਬਦੀ ਚਿਤ ਲਾਏ. ਮਨ ਮੁਖ ਮੁਗਧ ਗੰਵਾਰ ਪਿਰਾ ਜੀਓ, ਸ਼ਬਦ ਮਨੇ ਨ ਵਸਾਏ. ਮਾਇਆ ਕਾ ਭਰਮ ਅੰਧ ਪਿਰਾ ਜੀਓ, ਹਰਿ ਮਾਰਗ ਕਿਉ ਪਾਏ. ਕਿਉ ਮਾਰਗ ਪਾਏ, ਬਿਨ ਸਤਿਗੁਰ ਪਾਏ. ਮਨ ਮੁਖ ਆਪ ਗਣਾਏ. ਹਰ ਕੇ ਚਾਕਰ ਸਦਾ ਸੁਹੇਲੇ, ਗੁਰ ਚਰਣੀ ਚਿਤ ਲਾਏ. ਜਿਸਨੋਂ ਹਰ ਜੀਉ ਕਰੇ ਕਿਰਪਾ, ਸਦਾ ਹਰ ਕੇ ਗੁਣ ਗਾਏ. ਨਾਨਕ ਨਾਮ ਰਤਨ ਜਗ ਲਾਹਾ, ਗੁਰਮੁਖ ਆਪ 부ਝਾਏ. ਜਿਸਨੋਂ ਹਰ ਜੀਉ ਕਰੇ ਕਿਰਪਾ, ਸਦ ਹਰ ਕੇ ਗੁਣ ਗਾਏ. ਨਾਨਕ ਨਾਮ ਰਤਨ ਜਗ ਲਾਹਾ, ਗੁਰਮੁਖ ਆਪ 부ਝਾਏ. On the importance of the Gur, which can be read as the right method, spiritual knowledge, or the enlightener, depending on the context. And so here in this passage, the Guru elaborates on the need for the right method, for the right enlightener, and the right path in order to self-realize, which is the goal of Sikhi. So he addresses the mind as Pira Jio. It's the mind addressing that aspect of itself that is the potentially higher self by saying, O Pira Jio, by devotion to the Guru Enlightener In other words, it's inspiring itself. Gur ki seva kare. Devote yourself to the Gur enlightener, to the Gur, to the method, and learn to assimilate the knowledge of the Har Self. Har Naam Dhyaye. Manjo dur na jahe Pira Jio, kar baithiyan har paaye. So you don't have to wander around. In other words, you don't have to leave house and hearth in order to realize the self. Kar baithiyan har paaye. The self is present within. Kar baithiyan har paaye, sada chit laaye, sahje sat subhaye. So always be conscious, sada chit laaye, of the self that is present within you. And then become self-aware with spontaneous ease. This is the process. It's for recall, remembrance, becoming consciously aware of the self. And that eventually leads to Sahje Sat Subhai. And that happens when one sows the seeds of self-knowledge. Because then self-knowledge germinates in the mind and the self is realized. Namo Bija, Namo Janme, Namo Manavasai. So Nanak here asserts that self-realization is the greatest gift, but is received only if one acts. So Nanak Sach Naam Vadai Purab Likhya Pai. Purab Likhya Pai is often read as through the accumulation of past actions. And that is indeed what it should be read as, except that there is an idea that these actions are carrying over from perhaps previous births. We will leave that to the reader, but the idea here is that there has to be some effort and action in order to reach a point where grace becomes possible. You see? So there is this process that works. And the experience of the self, we know, is realized by following the path of the Guru enlightener. Nanak Naam Guru Mati Paya, Ape Le Lavai. So this is the process that takes over. We talked about this in the previous Sabbath as well. Ape Le Lavai. Get into the process. The process will just bring about these changes if you stay dedicated. So a further elaboration here is that to experience the Har Self, enter the process, the path of the Guru enlightener. And the first thing you do there is recitation with the tongue. Rasana Harras Chak. Enunciating the sound of Gurbani with the tongue. And through self-discipline. Self-discipline. Moe jio ana rasad goai. Other tastes. Don't hanker after different tastes. Focus. Focus the mind. And that experience that you get will be blissful when it enters the consciousness. Har ka naam mitha Pira Jio, ja chakhe chitlai. Chitlai, it should be in your consciousness. And it will be in your consciousness when you begin the process through recitation. That recitation of the Sabbath becomes internalized as feeling and emotion for the Har Self. You see how the process works. The tongue recites, the mind hears, and that becomes gradually internalized as feeling, as emotion, as virtue. And consciousness of the self begins to take root. That's how it works. And then the Guru questions practices, prevailing practices. E Vedani Chakri Pira Jio, he says, strange is that practice, my mind, which requires one to leave the spouse behind and wander off to strange lands. Here the spouse is being referred to as the self, meaning the self that you need to unite with is right here in the mind, and yet you're wandering off to strange lands. Here, obviously, it is a pointer to the habit, to the practice of wandering mendicants. So the Guru is questioning it. He says, strange is that practice. The bliss of self-knowledge, he assures them, is not found by roaming around. Instead, he says, such wandering only inflames the passion of greed, the poison of greed, and what that does is to cause us to become delusional and lose one's way, parampulai. That is a description of the bondage of Maya. That can only be released through the word of Guru wisdom. You see, Nanak Maya ka dukh, the bondage of Maya, tadde chuke, will be released only when Gur Sabdi Chitalai, when the Sabad sinks into the consciousness. In other words, internalization. But as it happens, we are manmukhs, mind-centered, egocentric people, and the Guru calls people like us Mugd Gawar Pira Jio, Manmukh Mugd Gawar Pira Jio. Ignorant and foolish people do not engage with the message of Guru wisdom. Manna sabad manna vasai. So how could they possibly find their way to the self? Har marg kyun paaye? They are blinded by the delusion of Maya. Maya ke param andha pira jio. They are blind, my mind, and are only aware of their own egos. Manmukha aap ganaye. On the other hand, devotees of the self are always in service of the self and are fulfilled. Har ke chakar sada suhele gur charani chitalai. Again, there's stress on chitalai, is to bring into consciousness or to transform and transcend the consciousness that is egocentric, homicentric, to become hukam-centric. And so, says Nanak, the Gur guided find the jewel of self-knowledge through the Sabad. On that note, until the next time, Vaheguru Ji ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji ki Fateh.